It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, I got you there.
Okay, can you hear us now?
Can you hear us? Yeah, I can.
Oh, you hear us now, Matthew?
I do.
Okay, great. Okay, we're on the air.
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're on the air now with Matthew Richer, and he's the author of Mysterious Death of Kurt Cobain, Suicide or Murder, You Decide. Okay, sorry about that, my friend. I had a little bit of technical difficulties. So now, Matthew, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who is Matthew Richer?
It's actually Ricker, like German, but that's okay.
Okay, Ricker.
No worries. I divide my time between the East and West Coast. I've known Tom Grant, who's the co-author, for a number of years. And let's see. And I've been in the case for a long time. But there have been a couple of books about the death of Cobain, and Tom cooperated with them, but they were never very good. They always contained a lot of errors, and it was always kind of, it was something, when you read about the case, it was like getting a story secondhand. It was never very effective, and there were also errors as well in other books. So I was always encouraging Tom to write his own, and then it was more, he decided to, once he retired as a full-time private investigator, he decided he wanted to write the book with me, and so I was the writer-researcher of the book, and while he was a private investigator, obviously who investigated the case originally in 1994.
Okay, before we get to the book, though, now what is your background? Now, were you a writer before this? Were you ever an investigator?
Yeah. I've written for a lot of publications in the United States and abroad. I've written a lot, mostly about American politics, particularly immigration policy. People know me best probably from my writings on vdare.com. I get a lot of readers associate me with that. I think the article, not the article I'm most proud of, but the article that people seem to remember me most for is last year, a couple of months before Donald Trump ran for office, I wrote an article predicting that he would run, and he would run on immigration. And that turned out to be true. And that's the one I get an email about it almost every day. But I've never really written about rock and roll or popular music or even true crime before. It was something that was a bit of a departure for me. But the writers who were writing about Kurt Cobain death seemed to be
Matthew, you're duplexing a little bit because of Skype. I don't know if you're Wi-Fi or not. Could I call you on the phone? Would that work?
Yeah, of course. Go right ahead.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, and I'll fill. Okay, we have here Matthew Ricker with us, okay? And he's the author of Mysterious Death of Kurt Cobain, Suicide or Murder, You Decide. Hey, a couple of things I did want to make some announcements before we got started, but it was such a hectic little start there. I think we started a little bit early, too. Next week there's a rally here in Las Vegas, July 10th, in front of FBI headquarters. Let's see, FBI headquarters is over on, they moved it, okay? It's over on 1787 West Lake Mead Boulevard, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89106, and it's going to be a sit-in out in front of Las Vegas, the FBI headquarters, demanding an arrest of Hillary Clinton. Okay, so you can get out there. If you're going to come out, we're going to start about 12 o'clock. If you're going to come out, make sure you bring a lot of water and sunscreen, and bring stuff to share with other people. So Matthew Ricker, you're there, right? Matthew?
No worries.
So you're back now, right? Matthew?
I'm all set.
Okay. Now,
He's on the phone.
Matthew, you're on the phone now, right?
Yes.
Okay, much better. By the way, for the people in the chat room, the sit-in is going to be July 10th, next Sunday, out in front of FBI headquarters. So now, Matthew, before we get to the book, though, a couple of questions for you. Now, how old are you?
I'm 45.
Okay, and what part of the country you live in?
I divide my time between New England and California.
Okay, and do you have some kind of speaker on? Because we're getting a little feedback again.
No, you still had a Skype on. I just turned it off.
Okay, good.
I don't.
Okay, now you're great, Matthew. Okay, now you're great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, now you mentioned something about that you had some kind of information that Trump was going to run on immigration. What made you come to that conclusion?
Well, I followed Trump for a long time, and I was I was convinced that he was going to run because he'd written a couple of campaign books. You know, every candidate who wants to run for president, they publish a book. It's basically a campaign book, and usually they're not very good, and most people don't even read them. But he'd written a couple, and so I read his, and I became convinced that he was going to run. And when he went after, remember, he very aggressively investigated President Obama and his birth certificate issue
Right.
Before the 2004 election. And I was surprised that he had done that. I thought that took a lot of political courage to do that. And he did it, and he got away with it. Not only that, he also got President Obama to back down. He's probably one of the only people who's forced President Obama to back down. So I was convinced then that he was going to run, and that this was something that he definitely wanted. So I wrote an article predicting that, and then a couple of months later he announced, and here we are.
Yeah. And where can we find that article?
VDare.com.
Okay, great. Now back to this whole thing with Kurt Cobain. Now you're saying that you weren't a fan of rock music. Were you a fan of Nirvana?
No, actually. One of the things that interests me about it is I remember when he died how affected people were by it, but I wasn't a Nirvana fan. I can't remember, was I still an undergraduate? I was told, when I was an undergraduate, Nirvana was a very popular band, but I was not a fan at all. And when Kurt Cobain died, I actually didn't know who he was, but I certainly knew who Nirvana was. And so I'm not a big rock and roll fan. I was a fan of the Case. I think the story is a fascinating story, but I don't come from it from the perspective of a fan. I think when you do that, other people have done that. And I think when you do that, sometimes it blinds you to certain things.
Yeah, I got you. Now, what was your first exposure to the actual allegations that it wasn't a suicide? Was it the Nick Broomfield article documentary?
No, it was before that. It was the first time was I heard. I'd met Tom Grant, and I heard an interview he'd done on the radio, and then I became interested in it after that. I wrote an article about it for WorldNetDaily.com back in the 90s, and then I stayed interested in it, and I stayed in contact with Tom since then. And but I was always fresh. I sort of I would pick up the subject and drop it again, and pick up the subject and drop it again, much like Tom Grant did. And then when Tom retired, we finally decided to write the book that always should have been written.
And that's interesting. That Tom Grant, he's retired now?
He's semi-retired. He's retired as a private investigator. He only consults, but he's retired.
How old is he?
He's 68 years old.
68 years old, okay. Hey, you know what I always wondered about him? The question off the top of my head. How did he become involved with Paula Jones, that he was Paula Jones' bodyguard? Do you have any idea?
He was hired as a private investigator to investigate Paula Jones, to investigate President Clinton.
For Paula Jones.
By Paula Jones' legal team.
Okay. All right, so back to...
But he wasn't a bodyguard.
He wasn't his bodyguard. Okay, I get so many conflicting...
No, he was just a private investigator. They hired to investigate the, Bill Clinton's women, so to speak,
right.
during the legal case that the Paula Jones legal team had against President Clinton.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so now, what do you think was the motive for the murder? Okay, that's a good question now. Okay, do you think there was a motive for his murder, Kurt Cobain?
Sure. Have you read the book?
No, I have not read your book. No.
All right. Well, the motive was pretty. The motive was pretty obvious, really. One of them was money. Courtney Love married Kurt Cobain for a few different reasons, but one was her. When you read the book, we do a good biographical section in the book of Courtney Love, and we depict her as, and we draw a lot on her own relatives, her own mother and her own grandmother, for insight into Courtney Love. And we depict her as a sociopath, which is what we believe she is. And going back to, pretty much the time she was born, she was a very disturbing, very evil child, even as a toddler. Her own mother realized there was something wrong with her when she was little, when she gave her a pet dog, a little puppy, and when she was 2 years old, she took the puppy and she snapped its leg in half. And her mother, who's a therapist, realized, okay, there's something really wrong with this child. And she was, pretty much a criminal from a young age. She was, turning tricks, stripping as a teenager. She was in a reform school, juvenile hall. She was committed. She had mental problems. She simply, Courtney Love admits this.
Yeah.
And very often revels in it. But one of her lifelong ambition, starting when she was a teenager, according to Courtney, was to be a rock star. But Courtney doesn't have any talent, and she doesn't even have the ability to sit still and learn how to do something. Like, Courtney's never learned how to cook or drive a car or things like that. There's a lot of things she can't do, and she can't play any instruments. But she, her strategy, and she was often very open about this, was to piggyback on the talent of another male musician, a more promising male musician, and so that when he became a star, she would sort of become a star vicariously through him. And at a certain point, she could just ditch the guy and be a star all on her own. She tried this with a number of men, including Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins. She left Billy Corgan because she targeted Kurt Cobain, and she thought Kurt Cobain was a more promising stepping stone for her. So right before Kurt Cobain's death, they were going to get a divorce. He had told his attorney, Rosemary Carroll, that he wanted a divorce and to hire him a divorce attorney. He'd written Courtney several letters, and he told her, quite openly that he was going to divorce her, and that he had authorized his attorney, Rosemary Carroll, to cut Courtney out of his will. The other thing he also did was he had helped Courtney record an album. The album lived through this. Kurt had written almost all the lyrics, and he had composed all the music. And it was a very different music from Courtney had ever attempted before. It was very melodic and very catchy, and he had ghosted this whole album for her. So on the eve of she's now 29 years old, going on 30. That is very old for an aspiring musician. And but right before, really about something like, I think it was 12 days before her album was to come out, she hired Tom Grant. And what she told Tom was, my husband is about to divorce me. We have a prenuptial agreement. I'm not going to get anything. And my album is just about to come out. Now, the band Nirvana, which was the biggest band in the world at the time, had just broken up, and the public was just finding out about this. And a major factor in the breakup of that band was simply Courtney's presence in the band, in his relationship. She was just a human toothache for everyone, and no one could stand her anymore, and the band was breaking up. That was a big stress on the band. So Nirvana, the most popular band in the world, was breaking up. Kurt Cobain was divorcing Courtney Love, and her album was just about to come out in the wake of this. So that was going to be accompanied by the two very public revelations. And her album was probably going to tank because of that. She was going to be blamed for the breakup of Nirvana. Kurt was leaving her, and then it was also probably going to come out that she didn't even do the album. So Courtney lived very large. She had absolute control over Kurt Cobain's finances. She took private jets. She took limousines. She lived very large, and she had absolute control over all of his money. and that was all about to go away. Now, if he divorces her, she's going to get a settlement of some kind, but we don't know what, maybe half, but they had a prenuptial, maybe not even half, because they had a prenuptial agreement. If he commits suicide, she gets it all.
So okay, so that's your, you think that's your motive, okay? Now back to Courtney's childhood, okay? There was something too about her family was involved in some kind of a cult, a psychological cult or something like that, or a therapy group like Est or something. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, her mother was a hippie,
right?
And she had tried all kinds of different fads, and they just tried all kinds of strange hippie fads. But I don't know that you would call them into a religious cult. They're more kind of in hippie cults for a while there, and I think the mother tried a lot of different things to try to help Courtney, anything to try to help this child who just seemed to be born a very disturbed person, but nothing seemed to work. Her father was, we've never really had anything to do with the father, but the father was a former manager for the Grateful Dead, and he was very much into the drug culture. But the mother and father, they divorced at a very young age. And Courtney did spend some time with him, and I don't know that was terribly good for her. But at any rate, she had a very strange childhood, and she was born a very strange child. And very often she'll openly admit to the fact that she was, born evil, and she thinks, it's a kind of a rock and roll thing to claim, you're born evil. It's sort of, she sees it sometimes as a kind of strength.
Now, there was an allegation, too, that her father, Hank Harrison, gave her LSD when she was 5 years old. What did you guys come up with in your investigation with that?
We couldn't confirm or deny that. It's Courtney, it may have happened, but
okay.
There's no real proof of it. So we didn't take too much of an interest in Hank Harrison writing the book. I don't think his name appears once in it, actually.
Okay, now, I had another guest on, too, one time who knew Courtney when she was in middle school up there in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she attended the Presidio Middle School. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not familiar with that. I don't remember her really. She did spend a lot of time in San Francisco. She was born there, and her mother grew up there, but she spent most of her childhood in Oregon.
Okay,
so maybe they went back to San Francisco for a brief period of time, but I don't recall that.
Now, what about, there was another thing, because I've had Hank on the show a couple of times, and I just spent a few hours with him a couple of weeks ago. Now, there was an incident, too, where Hank was, I believe it was in Ireland, and Courtney came over there to visit him, and she brought like 10,000, 15,000 hits of LSD with her. Are you familiar with that story?
I'm familiar with the story, but I mean, I'm not sure if it's true or not. I mean, that's just that if that's Hank's story, that's Hank's story.
Right.
But we didn't really spend a lot of time with her. We didn't really talk about her life in Ireland or anything like that in the book, or any of her. I know she went to Ireland for a time, and then she went to Liverpool for a time, but we didn't discuss that in the book. We didn't think it was quite relevant. But she's been a drug addict since she was a very young child, and it's very common with sociopathic personalities.
Yeah, that's everybody we've ever talked to about Courtney Love, everyone says, turning tricks and the drugs as a kid and all this kind of stuff. Okay. All right. So you believe the motive was Courtney? You definitely believe it was a murder, right?
Yes.
Now, lay it out for us. Why do you think it is impossible for it to have been a suicide as the police department came to that conclusion, the medical examiner, all these people? Why couldn't it be a suicide?
Well, it's pretty easy, really. Well, first of all, the case was never really. The case was ruled pretty much. If you look at the police reports, it's very obvious that the case was ruled that day as a suicide, pretty much at the crime scene, which is very common. Police officers often, if a case is reported as a suicide, which it was, that was the call that the police got. They very often will just assume the suicide position and rule a death a suicide when it could not, when it could in fact been a murder. That is pretty common. But also, one is the issue of the heroin. So heroin, when Kurt Cobain's death certificate was signed the very day after the autopsy was performed. Now, the autopsy was performed by a 30-year-old apprentice medical examiner named Nicholas Hartshorn, who has not yet been board certified. He was not a board certified medical examiner. He was just out of med school, and he was working as he had a fellowship with the King County Medical Examiner's Office. And he was just sort of learning the trade of being a medical examiner. And he performed the autopsy on Kurt Cobain and signed the death certificate the following day as a suicide. That was a Saturday he signed that death certificate. And it takes 3 or 4 weeks for toxicology results to come in. He should never have signed the death certificate the following day. And the body was released to the funeral home the following day and cremated, I believe, the following Wednesday, so 6 days later. So now the heroin that was found in his body, it leaked out in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer the following week, and it was later confirmed by the Seattle Police Department that he had 1.52 milligrams per liter of heroin in his bloodstream when he died. Now, that is 3 times the lethal dose of heroin. You would have to take at least inject about 225 milligrams of heroin into your bloodstream to achieve that blood alcohol level post-mortem. Now, so that makes it impossible for him to have picked up the shotgun. If you inject that much heroin into your system, the needle should have been found still in his arm if he injected that much heroin. Instead, we are told that he injected, and of course he injected himself twice, once in each elbow, and that there were 2 injection points found on him. And we are supposed to believe after injecting himself twice, he replaced the safety tips on each syringe.
Oh, really?
The syringe. Yeah. He put this. There were 2 syringes, and he put the safety tips on both syringes. The safety tips were replaced on the syringes. His sleeves were then rolled down, and then he put them back in a drug kit. The drug kit was found about 4 feet away from the body, so far from the body, but that doesn't make sense. And then he inserted the shotgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. That's a very implausible scenario. And the shotgun also was about 4 feet long. And if you think of Kurt Cobain as 5'7", he was a very frail, small guy, only about 120 pounds. So it would have been very hard for him to even reach the trigger of a 4-foot-long shotgun and not leave any fingerprints on the shotgun as well. No fingerprints were found. That is, a 4-foot-long shotgun, there should have been 22-inch barrel. There should have been lots of fingerprints on that gun, but there were none. Now, so with that high amount of heroin in the body, there was no way he could have operated that shotgun. He would have been unconscious within seconds. He should have been found, like a lot of junkies are, they're found with the needle still in the arm. Right. But that did not happen. Now, also, the shotgun shell, the murder weapon was a Remington 20-gauge shotgun, which is a light-load shotgun. That is the kind of weapon that it's a home defense shotgun, which is why he purchased it, because he'd had a lot of prowlers around his property, a lot of crazy Nirvana fans knocking on the front door and things like that. And it's the kind of shotgun you can fire. If you fire it at someone and it won't penetrate the walls and it won't kill your family in the next room accidentally or something like that. It's simply a home defense shotgun. It's a strange weapon to purchase for the purpose of suicide. Now, the ejection port on that shotgun is located on the right side of the shotgun. Now, when the shotgun was found in Kurt Cobain's hands, it was inverted with the ejection port facing Kurt Cobain's right. However, the shotgun shell was found lying to the left of Kurt Cobain's body. Now, how did that shotgun shell which should have ejected to the right, but it was found to the left? Well, that's a big red flag, but see, the police, they just thought they were arriving on the scene of a suicide, and so it didn't mean anything to them. So that's another red flag. So it would be very hard for him to have done that. And there's also the problem of the experience of heroin. Now, and we've done a lot of research on this. Now, heroin, when you inject heroin, a heroin user experiences what is known as the rush. And it's an intense experience. It begins about 10 seconds after injection. This extraordinary euphoric experience apparently happens, and it lasts for several minutes. Heroin users compare it to a sexual orgasm that filters throughout the entire body. Now, we're supposed to believe that Kurt Cobain injected all this heroin into his body and then instantly put a shotgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. So there's a big contradiction there as well. How many heroin addicts could deny themselves the rush, deny themselves the heroin experience right before it's about to begin? That doesn't make any sense, because this is the very experience that they're so very addicted to. But we're told that Kurt Cobain did exactly that. Now, heroin addicts, no one really, it doesn't make any sense. Heroin users do not inject heroin right before committing suicide. They may do so during the withdrawal stage, but not right before the rush begins. It just doesn't make sense. It's a euphoric drug. It's a major contradiction, but it's something that never occurred to the Seattle authorities.
But alternatively, if it was a murder, then what's the theory? That they shot him up and then put the gun in his mouth? What is the alternative theory of how this played out?
Well, the theory is that he was, the alternative theory would be, some people he knew, probably knew well enough to do heroin with. They invited him to do some heroin, and perhaps he shot himself up in one elbow and was, stupefied. And once you experience the rush of heroin, it turns into, after a few minutes, something called the nod, where you're sort of semi-conscious for a little while.
Right.
And when Kurt Cobain was in the nod can go on for a few hours. Once Kurt Cobain was in the nod, someone could have easily just shot him up on the other arm and to stupefy him. And once someone is in murders that are staged as suicides, the victim is very often stupefied by drugs or alcohol, some combination thereof, before the act is committed. So I think the plan was to inject him with enough heroin where he would be stupefied, so that then they could put the shotgun into his mouth and kill him quite easily. I don't think they probably didn't realize they were putting that much into him, but I think that was the goal, just to stupefy him before putting the shotgun in. Certainly he couldn't have done it himself.
Right, and people that are not familiar, listening to the show, that aren't familiar with this nod situation he's describing, I've seen guys with a cigarette, with a cigarette burning through their fingers or burning through their pants.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, you kidding me? Yeah, they do. They're totally out of it. You could definitely pull this off. Shoot him with another line and then stick the gun in his mouth. Okay. Now you said earlier that Tom Grant was hired prior to the suicide. He was, I believe, you said about 10 days. Well,
he was really probably just. He was hired on Easter Sunday, April the 3rd. He happened to be working that day on another case, and Courtney called. She went through the yellow pages and called pretty much any private investigator she could find. She probably called several, and she managed to catch Tom at his office. So she didn't know where Kurt Cobain was, and he had left rehab on April the 1st, and we believe she probably knew that he was leaving rehab because he called her and left her a message at her hotel. She was staying at a hotel in Los Angeles, and he left her a message telling her exactly where he was. And then when he returned to Seattle, he didn't go back to the house. She was worried that he was going to probably leave town because since they were getting divorced. She was worried that he was going to leave town and probably leave for good. That's what we believe, and that's certainly what she indicated to Tom Grant. And if he had left town and left her for good, that would have, that was pretty much her last chance that weekend if he left town. So when she contacted Tom Grant, her fear was that he would leave Seattle, he would leave it alive, because if he left it, that would be it for her. That would be her only opportunity. Now, when he was hired on the morning of Sunday, April 3rd, Kurt Cobain was, in her mind, still missing. She did not know where he was. But we believe he probably returned late April, Sunday evening, April 3rd, or into the early hours Monday, April 4th, and that's probably when the murder occurred.
You believe the murder
because on Monday morning she issued took out filed a missing person report. Sorry, that's the word. Filed a missing persons report with the Seattle Police Department about 7 a.m. on Monday, that was April 4th, and she filed a false missing persons report assuming the identity of Kurt's mother, Wendy O'Connor. She did not file a report in her own name. And the reason she did that is so that she could word the report. Now, the report says, I can read it to you exactly, Mr. Cobain ran away from a California facility and flew back to Seattle. He also bought a shotgun and may be suicidal. Now, with the reason she filed that report on Monday morning, we believe she probably did that when she believed that he was already dead. And she filed that report in Wendy O'Connor's name for a couple of reasons. One is the police would never assume that Kurt Cobain's mother would file a false report. If Kurt Cobain is suicidal, he must be suicidal. His own mother said so. But and the truth is, Kurt Cobain was largely estranged from his mother. But she also wanted to word the report. It was very important to her to do this, and it was very effective. You have to hand it to Courtney. One thing you learn when reading this book is Courtney is very smart and very shrewd. And a lot of the things she did this year during this whole case, terrible as they are really very impressive. Now, the report says that he ran away from a California drug facility, flew back to Seattle, and bought a shotgun, maybe suicidal. Now, that was the narrative she put in the minds of both the press and the Seattle Police Department. But it wasn't true. Kurt Cobain actually purchased a shotgun before he flew to Los Angeles.
What day did he buy the shotgun?
I believe he bought the shotgun on March 30th.
Okay.
And he only stayed a couple of days and in rehab and then left on the 1st. So we're to believe that it's not a normal thing to do if you think about it. Okay, I'm going to buy this shotgun in order to commit suicide, but before I do, I'm going to fly down to Los Angeles and kick my drug habit. It doesn't really make any sense. So,
well, let me ask you some questions about buying the shotgun. Now, did he buy the shotgun at her urging as part of this plan, or was anybody with him when he bought the shotgun that's a reliable witness?
Yeah, he bought a shotgun. The reason is, now, there's an interesting story. On March 18th, for example, now when people stage a murder to appear like a suicide, they often plant a trail beforehand and after the fact, and Courtney did exactly that. Now, on March 18th, Courtney dialed 911 and told the police officers that Kurt Cobain had locked himself in a room and had threatened to kill himself. Now, I got the police reports from this incident, and then what I did was I contacted the officer who intervened and was the first officer to arrive at the scene. He is now a detective at the Seattle Police Department. His name is Everett Edwards, and we talked about the situation at length. Now, Courtney told this story to the press that Kurt had done this, and she told this to the police officers, and it was widely reported in the media, but it turns out to be completely false. Now, when the police got to the house that day, Courtney was standing out in front of the house screaming at the police saying, he's got a gun, he's going to kill himself. And so the detective, he's then Officer Edwards, told her he had to wait a few minutes for backup, and then she screamed at him. She says, well, if you're not going to do anything, then just get the F out of here. But he stayed, and Edwards and his partner go to the back door, and some other officers arrive. They go to the front door. They're told that Kurt Cobain's inside with a gun. Mm. But in fact, Officer Edwards found Kurt Cobain standing by himself in the backyard with his hands in his pockets. No gun, no nothing. So he approached Kurt Cobain, and Kurt Cobain was just deeply embarrassed. Oh, my God, there goes my wife. She called the cops. She dialed 911. There she goes again, And so Edwards, now this is all on the record from a Seattle police detective. Kurt Cobain walked down the driveway, got in the back of the police cruiser with Detective Edwards, and they discussed the situation. And he said, "No, I didn't lock myself in a room with a gun. I just locked myself in a room because I had to get away from Courtney. And we had a big fight, and I just locked myself in a room, the bedroom, just to get away from her." And he wasn't under the influence of any drugs. He was very polite. He was very nice. And then Courtney, when the police officers went to interview Courtney, she actually admitted to them that she made the entire story up. Never saw him with a gun. He never threatened to hurt himself. She completely admitted that it was a fabrication. But at that incident, the police, because it was a domestic, a 911 domestic call, they had to confiscate all of Kurt Cobain's guns. That was just protocol. They just had to do that. So Kurt was
really in Seattle. In Seattle, they confiscate your guns just for a call without an arrest or anything.
Yeah, without an arrest. No, he could have gone back and gotten them, but he was a rock star, and I don't know why he didn't. But I mean, I think he was a rock star. He didn't really want to go down to the station and pick up his guns. He had plenty of money, so he just said, "Well, I'm just going to go out and buy a new one."
Yeah, there's nothing to prohibit you from buying a gun just because the cops appear at your door. That's crazy. You can just go out and buy all the guns you want. That's remarkable. I never heard of that before.
So he had his friend Dylan Carlson buy the gun in his name because he didn't want the police to come and confiscate another one in case there was another call or something like that, or in case 911 again. So that's why the shotgun was purchased, and that's why that was the only gun he had, was because of that incident. But that's one of that incident is one of the new things you learn in the book.
Okay.
No one had ever reported that before until we did.
And this guy Dylan, you've interviewed him.
Yeah.
And you find him to be a credible source. That he's not a suspect in all this conspiracy.
Is he a suspect? Not exactly. We have a list of persons of interest in the back of the book, and we do list persons of interest. Our definition is people that the police should interview if they're ever to reopen the case. Dylan Carlson is one of them.
Okay.
But Dylan Carlson, did actually help Tom Grant try to find Kurt Cobain, and he was a heroin addict, unfortunately. But I don't consider him quite a suspect.
Okay. It's okay. So now we know. Okay. So the situation is okay. He had bought the gun prior to going missing. Now, Courtney brings in Tom Grant on the 3rd. Kurt dies on the 5th. So now, when Tom is first hired, okay, I got a missing persons case. How does he start working the case? What does he do?
Well, when he's first hired, of course, he goes into Courtney's hotel room. Courtney appears at the door wearing a see-through nightgown. She's basically naked the entire time. She's there are a bunch of people in the room. Everyone's doing drugs. She has a bunch of unrelated temper tantrums. And if you read, and Tom decides at this point that Courtney's up to something. She says, when she first calls, someone stole my husband's credit card, and I need you to find out who's using it. And when Tom arrives at her hotel room, she admits to him, "Oh, actually, that's not true. I canceled the credit card." In fact, she canceled all of his cards, an ATM card, credit card, everything. The reason she did that, number one, she had control over his finances. Number two, she didn't want him to leave. She wanted him to return to the house. She didn't want him leaving Seattle. If she cut off all of his money, he would have to go home.
Right.
So very, very smart of her. Now, Tom realizes at this meeting that her story is not adding up and that she's lying. So he decides at this point, I'm going to record every conversation I have with her, and he does. Now, if you listen to the conversations at www.cobaincase.com, you can listen to some of them or many of them, and they are transcribed in the book. Many of these, and you can see her vacillating. She describes Kurt Cobain as being suicidal in one conversation, and then an hour later she will call Tom again and say, "Oh, Tom, he's divorcing me. He wants a divorce. He wants nothing to do with me." Then an hour later that she claims he's suicidal. Then she's vacillating back and forth between suicide and divorce. And then what she does is Courtney claimed that she was wanted to surveil a drug dealer in Seattle, in order to save Kurt Cobain. But Tom later learned that she actually is hoping that Kurt Cobain will be at the house so that she can allege Kurt Cobain is having an affair with this drug dealer. She was not trying to save Kurt Cobain's life. She was trying to acquire evidence of infidelity in their upcoming divorce case. If there's infidelity in a marriage, the prenuptial agreement could perhaps be voided. That was her belief, and that's what she hired Tom to do. Now, Kurt Cobain was seen at the house by his male nanny, Callie DeWitt, on Saturday, April 2nd. He was seen there with his part-time girlfriend, Jessica Hopper was her name. He was seen at the house on Saturday, very briefly. Courtney didn't tell Tom about this until Monday. So this sort of undermined the claim that Kurt Cobain was ever really missing. But Courtney also refused to let Tom surveil the house. The one place we know that Kurt Cobain had seen. She ordered him, you do not surveil the house, just surveil this drug dealer's apartment, and we'll catch him there. If Kurt shows up at the house, the nanny, Callie, will tell me. Now, it seems obvious that the reason she didn't want Tom watching the house is because she didn't want Tom to catch whoever was coming in, going from the house. But it doesn't make sense to not to surveil the house because that's the only place Kurt Cobain had been seen.
Okay, couple of questions. Now, Tom Grant, he was based out of California, correct?
Yeah, Beverly Hills, right.
Yeah, right, Beverly Hills, right. So now, Courtney, she was in an L.A. hotel room when she hired Tom Grant? Is that how
She was at the Beverly Hills Peninsula Hotel.
Okay, so but she doesn't hire a PI in Seattle. She hires a PI in California. For what reason? Do we have a reason for that?
Do we have a reason? Well, I think she just wanted to meet with someone in person to get him to help her, really. I think it was simply more panic than anything else. I mean, this is 1994. It's not like you can go online and search private detectives in Seattle. She pulled out the yellow pages that she had in her hotel room and just tried to find a private detective very quickly, and she found Tom Grant.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what kind of retainer did Grant get for this, to travel all the way to Seattle and lodging and all this kind of stuff? Any idea?
Well, because it was a missing persons case, Tom didn't require retainers for a missing person. He didn't require a retainer for that because a missing person case has to be solved so quickly. The longer a person is missing, they're more likely to end up dead. In fact, police departments, usually homicide teams will handle missing person cases because they very often do end in a homicide. So when he gets a missing person case, he does not take a retainer. That was his policy. But they did discuss a retainer a few days later, and it's in a recorded conversation, and she said, well, whatever your hourly rate is, I don't remember Tom's hourly rate, we can do that times 3. We'll give you that for a retainer, and then we'll take it from there. And then she says in the conversation, money's not an option. Money's not a problem, unless, of course, we get a divorce. Then, of course, money will become a problem. So that was the retainer Tom got. So he didn't get a retainer up front when he showed up, simply because of a missing person.
Okay, then real quick. So he traveled to Seattle on his own dime?
No. He was simply, he would bill the client for all that.
In the future?
Right.
Okay. And what date did they finally agree on a retainer agreement?
I think that was, I think that was Wednesday, the 6th.
Okay. Now, who was everyone? Was everyone?
That was the day he flew to Seattle.
Was everyone getting heroin from the same guy? All these friends and nannies and all these people and all these.
Was everyone getting heroin from the same guy?
Yeah. Was everyone, all these nannies and all these heroin drug addicts around Kurt, were they all buying their heroin from the same person?
I don't know about that. I know Dylan Carlson was a heroin source for Kurt and Courtney both, but I don't know who they were buying that. There was a drug dealer, the one that Courtney alleged that, or wanted to allege that Kurt had an affair with, named Caitlin Moore, who was living in the Capitol section of Seattle. That was the apartment that Tom was asked to surveil. She was a heroin dealer, and she was the principal heroin dealer for all of them. But I couldn't say that she was the only one.
Okay. And one more question, too. That's a little... I'm sorry to bounce around too much here, but the medical examiner, does the medical examiner have an amount of time of how long the body was lying there in that greenhouse?
Yeah, the medical examiner said, and of course it was a novice medical examiner, he said it could have been 24 to 48 hours.
24 to 48.
He said that at the time.
Right. And do we have another opinion now?
No, we don't.
Okay. Okay, so Tom now he heads out to Seattle. Tom's in Seattle, right? What's his next move now? What does he start doing?
Well, Courtney had arranged for Tom to meet up with Dylan Carlson, so Tom goes straight to Dylan Carlson's apartment, Kurt Cobain's best friend, the best man at his wedding.
Okay.
And Tom and Dylan's going to show him around. Now, when he and Dylan go to like a diner, and they go to come up with a plan to find Kurt Cobain. And Tom asked him a few questions, and Tom asked him, is Kurt Cobain suicidal? And Dylan had no idea what Tom was talking about. He just scoffed at the idea. He's not suicidal. That's ridiculous. It just was preposterous for him to even suggest something like that. And he's trashing Courtney. Courtney's a headache. I don't know why Kurt married her. No one can stand her. So he's getting a very different story from Kurt's best friend that he got from Kurt Cobain. So Tom has got even more. He's becoming even more suspicious. Now, just getting ahead a little bit. The following week, it was Kurt and Courtney's own attorney, Rosemary Carroll, who first suspected murder. She told Tom Grant, she called Tom and asked him to come to her office in Hollywood and told Tom that Kurt Cobain was not suicidal. And then she said that there was no way Kurt killed himself, and she tells him a story that Kurt had called her from Germany and said, I want to divorce Courtney. And then when he returned to Seattle, he told her that he wanted a new will, he wanted Courtney out of it. And Rosemary believed her, and then Rosemary said she got a call from Courtney saying, hire me the meanest, most vicious divorce lawyer you can find. And this is all just a couple of weeks before Kurt Cobain dies. So when Tom and Dylan are going to search, Tom and Dylan decide to go to Kurt and Courtney's house. Now, he was not allowed to surveil the house, but he was allowed to search it.
Before we get to that.
So he...
I'm sorry, Matthew.
He had the...
Matthew?
What's the matter?
Yeah, before we get to that, now, you said that the attorney had Tom meet her at her office back in California. What date was that?
After the body was discovered.
Oh, after the body was discovered.
The day after the body was discovered, this would have been April 8th, Tom flew back to Los Angeles. And then while he was in Los Angeles, a few days later, Kurt and Courtney's attorney called him at his office and said, can you come over? And when Tom came over, she told him everything that she knew about the divorce and hiring the attorneys, and she did not believe that Kurt was suicidal. So, and she also said that when Rosemary Carroll said when she went up to the funeral, she met Courtney and she asked Courtney to see her a copy of Kurt Cobain's suicide note, and Courtney wouldn't show it to her. She got the feeling that Courtney was hiding something. And Rosemary had worked with Courtney long enough. She knew how manipulative and scheming Courtney was. So she was convinced that Kurt had been murdered. And Tom was a little more reluctant to draw that conclusion, but Rosemary was adamant. So it was her idea that Tom return to Seattle to investigate the case further, Kurt and Courtney's own attorney. Okay. And when she did so, she said she told Tom that when he and Dylan went to search the house, Courtney, she had Courtney over her house at one time when Kurt was missing, and she heard Courtney talk to Dylan Carlson on the phone and say, "Dylan, be sure to check the greenhouse." So when they did go and check the house, Tom didn't know about the greenhouse. But at one point, Dylan left. When they first got to the house, Dylan went and knocked on the front door, and he didn't return for some time. And Tom's suspicion is that Dylan may have actually walked up to the greenhouse and seen the body through the doors and said nothing to him. But Dylan, of course, was a heroin addict too. So I think he probably reacted to the incident as a heroin addict, not as a friend, because he relied on Kurt Cobain's money to subsidize his habit. Dylan scored the drugs, Kurt paid for them, and when if he went and saw that, did as Courtney instructed, and saw the body through the greenhouse doors, he may have just thought of it as reacted to it as an addict, not as a friend, and just thought, oh God, what am I going to do now? How am I gonna pay for my habit? So at any rate, that was another red flag for Tom. But when Tom and Dylan went through the house, they found no evidence that Kurt Cobain was there. All they found the first time was a package of Rohypnol underneath Courtney's mattress.
Really? And was there any explanation for that?
Well, Courtney was pretty much addicted to Rohypnol.
Which is commonly known as...
She told Tom that she was still on it about 10 months later.
Well, that's the date rape drug.
The date rape drug, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the house was also very clean. Someone had ordered a maid. The house was notoriously messy, but when Tom went to search it with Dylan, a maid had gone through it and serviced it and left it immaculate. So there was no sign that Kurt had been in the house recently at all. So then they just left the house. And then they found Kurt Cobain's car. So the following afternoon, when they were still searching for Kurt, they found his car and parked in front of Chris Novoselic's house, his bandmate. That would have been Thursday afternoon, April 7th. And they took a picture of the car, but then they kept looking, and then they moved on. And Courtney told them to go back to the house to search the master bedroom closet to look for the shotgun. Now, so that was been Thursday evening. They were going back to the house again. And then when they went back to the house, and I think I emailed you guys a copy of this, they found a letter written by the nanny on the main staircase on the bottom step, written by Callie. And the letter was just sort of a letter, to Kurt, criticizing Kurt for not doing more for Courtney and for being a bad husband. And it was lying on the bottom step. No, it's a suspicious letter. Tom thought it didn't make any sense. It wasn't there the day before, and it was just neatly placed there on the bottom step. So, and there was no evidence that Kurt had returned to the house. So Tom thought that the letter was just left there for him. So he left the house shortly before midnight on Thursday. And at 8 in the morning, the electricians arrived and to do work on the greenhouse, and they had and they discovered the body at that time. However, before they arrived at the greenhouse at 8 a.m. on Friday, April 8th, Kurt Cobain's car had been returned to the driveway. So sometime overnight, someone got the keys to his car and drove it back to the house. But we don't know who did that. That's a mystery.
Hey, also, too, with the electricians, wasn't there something that they were just there to change light bulbs or something ridiculous?
No, they were there to put an alarm on the greenhouse, which was separated. It was just above the garage. They were there to attach an alarm to that. But the funny thing is that 2 days before the body was discovered, Courtney had called, and this is according to the electricians themselves, and also we have Courtney's phone records from the hotel. I'll get to that in a minute. But Courtney had called. The body was found on Friday, April 8th, 1994. But on the previous Wednesday, Courtney had made a phone call from her hotel room in Beverly Hills to the electrician and asked the electrician specifically to wire the greenhouse and do electrical work on the greenhouse. Now, it's a strange call to make from a Wednesday. You're making all these calls to save your supposedly suicidal husband, and you have an album coming out, but you called an electrician to do a little wiring on the greenhouse? Strange request. They thought it was a strange request, which is why they told Tom Grant about it. But that's what she did. And then she called Dylan Carlson and told him to look in the greenhouse as well. So when she called the electricians, they of course spotted the body, and they called 911. And someone it was the electrician electrical company was called Becker Electric. Someone from the main office called the police for them, but then also called the local radio station and told them that Kurt Cobain had committed suicide in the garage. That's kind of how the story went, viral so quickly.
Do we know who made that phone call?
Now we talked to this electrician, and there were two. There was an electrician, and then his supervisor named Charles Pelly. He arrived on the scene, and when the police got there, they waited. The fire department came as well, and they forced entry. And then the fire department left, and there's a police officer. His name was Von Lewandowski. He allowed the electricians to come in and sort of inspect Kurt Cobain's body, something he should never have done. He should never allow the electricians to enter the crime scene and walk around, but he did so. And he allowed Charles Pelly and his colleague to inspect the body. And then he said with a laugh, he said, okay, and she said, you guys can go right now. I'm just going to sit here and talk to my friend Kurt. And he just started laughing, and then the electricians left. So pretty much, the story of Kurt Cobain's suicide actually broke on the radio that morning before the police officers even arrived at the crime scene. They probably heard about it, on the radio on the way over. So Courtney's framing of the story, based on the missing person report and this phone call that went out to the radio station, they really helped convince everyone, the police and the press, that Kurt Cobain must have committed suicide. We all saw it on the news.
Do we know who called the radio station?
No, just someone from the dispatch from the main office of Becker Electric. We don't know who it was.
Now, why do you think Courtney was in such a hurry for the body to be found?
Why was she in such a hurry? Well, the longer it... I don't know why she was in such a hurry, really. I think part of it was she wanted to capitalize on it because she had an album coming out the following Tuesday. It's a strange thing. Suicide survival is a very difficult thing, if it's legitimate, is a very difficult experience for people. There aren't too many experiences more difficult in life than being a suicide survivor. Now, when Kurt Cobain's body was found, she spent a lot of time on the phone with reporters. She just kept calling the press over and over again. She gave many reporters Tom Grant's cell phone number. Tom's cell was ringing off the hook the day Kurt Cobain's body was discovered because Courtney had given his cell phone number out to so many people. And reporters were calling her mother's house. Courtney called her mother. Courtney called the reporter Everett True in Cincinnati. She contacted her bandmate, Eric Erlandson, gave him a list of reporters to call. And she was constantly on the press, on the phone, talking to the press, trying to milk the story that very day. Very unusual behavior for someone whose husband supposedly committed suicide. The following day, she called Kurt Loder at MTV, and she spoke to him at length about Kurt Cobain's death. And she told him several lies. One of them was she told him that the Kurt Cobain, the damage to him was so severe that he had to be identified by fingerprints. Well, that's not true. The actual damage to Kurt Cobain's face was minimal because it was a very light load shotgun. And it is true he did have to be identified by fingerprints, but everybody is identified by fingerprints. Medical examiners do that for everyone. And she also told Kurt Loder, she quoted a line from the alleged suicide note, and she said, Kurt Cobain wrote, "I can't do this anymore. I can't live this life." Now, Kurt Loder got on MTV and quoted the suicide note, quoted that line to the whole world. But that line doesn't appear anywhere in the suicide note. He never wrote any such thing. He never wrote anything even remotely suicidal in the note. Now, if you look at the suicide note, and you can find it online because Tom Grant put it online, you can tell it reads really just like it's really just a retirement letter. It's a letter Kurt Cobain was in the habit of doing these things. He kept a lot of notebooks and like spiral-bound notebooks, and they were all stuffed with sheets of paper that he happened to find at the last minute. And it reads just like a retirement letter to his fans, except for the final 4 lines. And the final 4 lines read, "Please keep going, Francis," or rather, "Please keep going, Courtney, for Francis, whose life will be so much happier without me." And you can tell when you read the postscript that it's written in a different hand than the main body of the letter. The main body of the letter is just a simple retirement letter to his fans about leaving Nirvana. The letter itself was written in red pen on the back of an IHOP menu. Probably, when Kurt was sitting in a booth, ordering pancakes. The idea that he kept IHOP menus, as stationery in his house is kind of preposterous. But that's how the note read. And now she quoted that note to Kurt Loder the following day, and then little lines from the note kept appearing in the press over and over again that weren't actually to be found in the note. Now, there's a chapter on this in our book, and we describe how Tom sort of tricked Courtney Love into giving him a copy of the note. She gave Tom a copy of the note to let him look at it, and Tom went down to her fax machine in her house and made a copy on the fax machine. And that's how he got a copy of the note. And he actually made that note public. Courtney never made that note public. In fact, according to Courtney, Kurt Cobain has actually written 4 suicide notes, not just one, according to her. But there's only one that's been made public. That was by Tom Grant, not by her. But according to her, he has written 4. But we've never seen any of them, just that one.
Real quick, what was Tom Grant's history in law enforcement before he became a private investigator?
He was
homicide, right?
He worked in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I think it was 7 years as a patrol officer and then 2 years as a detective. And then he went and became a private detective. He worked for an agency, I think it was called the John Lynch Agency, they were a well-known agency. They were Bobby Kennedy. He used to work for, Bobby Kennedy's presidential campaign and things like that. They were a big agency. And then Tom finally decided to go out on his own.
Okay. Now, there's also some criticism of Tom about that he didn't find the greenhouse. What is his explanation for that?
Well, the greenhouse was Dylan was supposed to show him around the property. Now, there was and he did not take Tom up the greenhouse. Now, when you got to the house, the stairs to the greenhouse were actually in the rear of the house on the backyard. And it was raining very hard the whole time Tom was searching for him. And Dylan did not take him up the greenhouse. It was Dylan's job to show him around. Now, the Seattle police, because of the missing person report, they also checked the house. They also went to the house several times, but none of them checked the greenhouse either. So Tom didn't know that there was a room above the garage, and Dylan never told him about it. And so Tom, it lends more credence to the suspicion more weight to the suspicion that Dylan actually probably learned that the body was up there and didn't want to go up there. But yeah, that was one criticism of Tom. But it was Dylan's job to show him the entire property, and he didn't take him up there. So that's that really. But Tom did go up to the greenhouse after the body was discovered, and he did take pictures of the crime scene. And I've seen them, and there are actual windows all around the. There are a lot of windows all around the greenhouse. It gave one a near panoramic view of the entire property, and also so if someone came into that greenhouse to kill Kurt, he would have known who they were because he would have had to have seen them coming. And the lock on the greenhouse was just simply a push and twist lock like you might find on a bathroom door. So the idea that Kurt could have locked himself inside the greenhouse, preposterous. Anyone could have just locked that door and on their way out. And the police have claimed that Kurt barricaded himself inside the greenhouse and wedged a stool against the door. But that isn't true, because I spoke to I tracked down the fireman who forced entry to the greenhouse, and his name was Lieutenant John Fisk, and we spoke to him on the record, and he was the one who forced entry into the greenhouse when the body was discovered, and he assured us that there was no stool wedged up against any door. He knocked a pane of glass, reached in, turned the knob, and they pushed that door open very easily. So that was something the Seattle police put in their reports because they had to make it sound like Kurt Cobain. Once they realized that they had botched the investigation, they had to make it sound like Kurt Cobain was inside the room alone, and had to have been inside the room alone when he died. But the fact is, it was just a simple lock, and anyone could have locked that door on their way out.
You know, it's interesting. You describe the lock as one of these little push-button bathroom-type locks, and yet they were having an alarm installed on the same room. That's kind of the first thing you do.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
You put a better lock on there, you know. Now, with all the stuff with the police and the mishandling the case and stuff like that, do you believe it's possible that there were higher-ups in the police department that could have been complicit in this cover-up at the behest of the conspirators behind the murder?
No, I don't think it does. It doesn't sound like that to us. It sounds like when you read the reports, it sounds like they just wrote the case off as a suicide that day. Now, the grunge scene that was sort of new to Seattle, and Seattle's, a nice city, and this is a very nice neighborhood. Seattle, the establishment, the political establishment in Seattle, the longtime residents of Seattle, the upper class, they didn't like the grunge, and for understandable reasons. They didn't like the whole grunge rocker scene that had taken over Seattle in the early 90s. That was not an image for the city a lot of people liked, and we think there was that kind of bias against Kurt Cobain and his class of people. We think that, the police just didn't like Kurt Cobain and didn't like the bands and didn't like the whole scene. And that was part of the bias against them. They didn't like the idea of, these heroin rockers, so to speak. So that predisposed them against Kurt Cobain, but I don't think there was any kind of complicity. I think they wanted it to be a suicide, it looked like a suicide, and they just sort of, prejudged the scene that morning. Remember, if you can even find this online, the day within hours of Kurt Cobain's body being discovered, a Seattle spokesman, a woman named Vanette Tichy, she stood in the driveway of Kurt Cobain's house and said that Kurt Cobain had committed suicide and a suicide note had been found at the scene. And this is before any analysis, any autopsy, anything had been done. They made that announcement. And the medical examiner's office also told the press that it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound the day the body was discovered. Completely irresponsible. So they just prejudged this a suicide, and that's the way it looks. There are too many people who prejudged it as suicide, too many moving parts to have it be that kind of conspiracy. What we do think happened is once they realized that they had botched the investigation, and they realized that, I think, probably within about a week, then they started covering their butts. But that wasn't really, complicit in the murder. That was sort of just they didn't want to look bad after the fact. Now, for example, Kurt Cobain's credit card that Courtney Love asked Tom Grant to track the day she hired him. Someone tried to use that credit card all week long. In fact, the day the body was discovered, Friday, April 8th, someone tried to use that credit card twice that morning. So someone had obtained that credit card from Kurt Cobain's wallet and from the body and was trying to use it. Now, that credit card was never found. The police had no interest in that credit card activity, but Tom went to the police station and showed them, the reports from the company on the following Friday. But, the case had already been closed and the body had already been cremated. So the body was cremated 6 days after it was discovered. And once the body's cremated, the case is pretty much closed. So Tom showed that to and this is in the book, showed that to the lead detective, Donald Cameron. And at that meeting, he actually brought Harvey Levin from TMZ.
Sure.
He actually brought Harvey Levin from TMZ along with him to that meeting. and showed Cameron the credit card activity and some other items of information. And then all of a sudden, Cameron started investigating the case. They started looking into the suicide note. They started looking into other things, but it was largely cosmetic. They didn't check the shotgun for fingerprints. They didn't analyze the suicide note. They didn't analyze a lot of the forensic evidence until well after the body was cremated, and that was just simply because of the noise Tom was making. But there was no complicity before the fact. There was only a kind of cover up after the fact.
Okay, now you describe the noise Tom was making. Like Tom couldn't establish a relationship with these guys. What kind of noise was he making? Noise in the press?
Well, you've got to look at it from their point of view. I mean, he shows up. He's a Beverly Hills private investigator. Yeah. Shows up at the homicide detective's office, and he starts telling him all the mistakes he made. And cops have big egos, and they just didn't want to hear it. You're not going to let some private investigator from Beverly Hills tell you how to do your job or how to investigate a crime. They just didn't want to hear it.
But at that point, Tom couldn't find a local guy who was a retired detective, homicide detective, to go down there with him, for like $80, $100.
He brought a reporter with him, Harvey Lebanon.
Yeah, okay. Because you could find a local guy for a couple $100 to go with you.
What's that?
You could find a local guy to go with you for a couple of $100 just for the day.
Well, he hired a local.
He did.
He hired a local private investigator, an ex-cop from Seattle, to do some surveillance on the drug dealer's house in Seattle, and he met with that ex-cop private investigator the day after the body was discovered. And his name was Ernie Barton. He was very upset with it, but Tom felt him out and said, Ernie, you know a lot about how law enforcement works in this town. Why are they in such a hurry to close this case?
Yeah.
He looked at Tom and he said, "What do you care, Tom? They're all just a bunch of junkies." And that was the attitude Tom was encountering from law enforcement in the town. And they just didn't care about these people. They were a bunch of junkies, and they just, they didn't care if they were dead or alive. So he had no luck. He was calling different members of the police department, but they were all deaf to him.
Okay, now I've got a couple of questions I'm getting from the chat room. They're nagging the hell out of me. One is the medical examiner was a friend. I know, these questions are galore. The medical examiner was a friend of Courtney, and he died in a bungee jumping accident. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, he died base jumping in Switzerland.
And they were friends?
He was friends with Courtney. He was Nicholas Hartshorn. He was like I said before, he was an apprentice medical examiner. He was not yet board certified. And he was friends with Courtney. He was sort of a peripheral participant in the grunge music scene. He did not really know Kurt Cobain, but he did know Courtney Love, and he was friendly with her. But he did do the autopsy, and he signed the death certificate the following day. We've not found any evidence that he was complicit before the fact or anything like that. But he's dead now. Perhaps Courtney did, help predispose him to the idea that Kurt Cobain was suicidal. She tried to plant that one in a lot of people's minds. But he's been dead at least 10 years.
Well, stop and think, Matt. Here you got Courtney Love. We know, we're just casual observers. We know she was a whirlwind of chaos. So, and this is a person who's a casual friend of yours. This person's a whirlwind of chaos. Okay. So either she's telling me something, either she's definitely involved in it, or, hey, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to go near it because she's a nut. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's one or the other. Mm-hmm. It's one or the other. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
He's not saying, this is a coincidence that this lunatic is involved in this murder-suicide situation here.
Yeah, I don't know what to make. I mean, he certainly did a poor job, Nicholas Hartshorn. And he did, I think at the very least, he acted a bit like the police officer Cameron. He started sort of, covering his butt after the fact when he learned that he had goofed the investigation. He started making strange claims. He claimed he read, I had read thousands. When he was only 34 years old, he claimed he had done, thousands of autopsies, and I've read thousands of suicide notes, and Kurt Cobain's suicide note is, looks like a suicide note to me. And we talked to some of the top forensic scientists in the country, and they thought that claim was just preposterous, total BS. There's no way he's read thousands of suicide notes. Only 1 in 5 suicides actually leaves a note anyway. So he would make lots of strange claims like that. Basically, what Hartshorn did and what the Seattle police did, and to this day, they have made one argument that Kurt Cobain has committed suicide, and it's always the same one. They have made the argument from authority. We are the experts, and we say this was a suicide. We're the experts, we know how this works, and we believe this is suicide. That is really the only argument anyone has ever made. I've looked, and I researched it. There is no argument for suicide. No one has ever made one, just the argument of authority. The argument from authority is a logical fallacy. Arguments rely on evidence. They do not rely on authority.
Okay, one more question from the chat room. Detective Terry, who was a narc that was friends with Courtney, was shot by the side of the road?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what do you know about that?
Well, Detective Terry is mentioned in the missing person report. Now, the final line of the missing person report, when she says that Kurt Cobain is suicidal, had bought a shotgun, has run away from a California facility, the final line says, "See Detective Terry for more info." Now, see Detective Antonio Terry for more info. Now, that the missing person report that was written in Wendy O'Connor's name, that was released to the press the day Kurt Cobain's body was discovered, very quickly, within hours. Now, we always suspected that Courtney released that missing person report to the press. We don't think the police would have done it that quickly. And the Antonio Terry reference was missing from all the media reports about the missing person report. So Antonio Terry was a detective, narcotics detective with the Seattle Police Department. He was, I think, about 35, 36 years old. And Courtney told Tom Grant that she used to use Terry to bust dealers that she didn't like. And it seems that Terry used her as a kind of snitch to get other dealers, and they sort of worked with each other a little bit for their mutual benefit. We don't know what he did for her, because in June of 1994, he was killed in an unrelated accident. Some guys were sort of career criminals. We think it's unrelated. They had pretended to have their car broken down on an off-ramp on Highway 5, and Terry pulled over to help them, and they shot and killed him. So it is a strange coincidence, but it's probably just a coincidence. We don't know if Detective Terry helped homicide detectives to jump to the conclusion of suicide at the scene. We don't know if he colluded with them at all. We don't know if he communicated with them at all. We don't know. He died so quickly. We just don't know. I do think that this is a rock that the Seattle police don't want to lift. One reason they don't want to reopen this case or reinvestigate is they don't want to look into the relationship between Antonio Terry and Courtney Love. That's a rock they don't want to lift. So that's, I think, one additional motive for them. But what he did for Courtney, we don't know. Because there's more than just being a drug snitch? I think it could be more than just being a drug snitch.
What do you think? Because I have information.
I don't know.
Because I have information.
That would be speculation. I really don't know. I think he may have. If she included his name on the report, so she must have been very confident that that he would not screw things up for her. So she must have. Maybe she sent a few bucks his way. It's hard to know. I don't want to speculate too much, but she was obviously very confident that he would not screw things up for her, or else his name would not have been on the report. So, and I think it's one reason why the Seattle police don't want to go near this case. But what he did for her, I just don't know. Okay, a couple of questions. Speculate in all kinds of different directions, but at the end of the day, I don't know. We don't know. Now, the shooters that killed him, were they arrested and convicted? Yeah, they went to jail. They're alive today? Yeah. Okay, and they claim their motive was? They claim their motive was robbery. Oh, boy. Okay, now, along these same lines, okay, back to this. Now, how would she have a copy of that missing persons police report? Well, she made the report.
Okay,
She wrote a copy of it.
but when you make the report, they give you a copy in Seattle?
Well,
Unless you ask for it.
she made the report. She made the report from Los Angeles.
Okay.
So, she would have probably gotten a copy, but I'm not sure. Perhaps it could have been Antonio Terry putting out the report. It could have been Courtney's Kurt Cobain's mother putting out the report. Kurt Cobain's mother, Wendy, was actually very friendly with Courtney Love. A very strange, unusual relationship. She was not friendly with Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain had very little to do with her, never gave her a dime. She kicked him out of the house when he was a teenager, and he was homeless for a few months, and, he was, very estranged from his mother. But Courtney was always very chummy with Wendy O'Connor. When she got into Kurt's life, she befriended her very quickly, and after Kurt Cobain died, she started sending money Wendy's way, and she bought her a house in Olympia, a big, giant house that was owned by a former logger baron. So,
well, that makes...
I don't know, what they have a strange relationship, Wendy O'Connor and Courtney Love, but Wendy has gone along with a lot of Courtney's lies, and we don't know why.
That's interesting. That may answer this question in the chat room right now. Is what did Courtney say to Kurt's mother to turn her against Tom Grant? She's getting a free house. That might be one.
To turn her against Tom Grant? Well, we don't know. When Tom went to the house to meet with this chapter is described in great detail in the book. When he went to meet with Wendy, and Wendy was wearing a T-shirt, one of Kurt Cobain's T-shirts that said "Grunge is dead," and she told Tom that she had some suspicions. But then Courtney went over, hugged Wendy, and whispered something in her ear, and then Wendy wouldn't talk to Tom anymore. So Tom never knew what she whispered in her ear. Now, Wendy O'Connor, we do list her in the book as a person of interest. Now, one of the things, I'll tell you this, I spoke to the first reporter, a guy named Robert Holguin, who wrote the first write-up of Kurt Cobain's death on the day the body was discovered. One of the first reporters at the scene wrote it for the Associated Press on their newswire. Remember, online news wasn't quite around in 1994, and the newswires were still what people relied on. And this guy, Robert Holguin, he wrote the very first news story on Kurt Cobain's death, and he spoke to Wendy O'Connor, and I spoke to him. And he got a quote from Wendy O'Connor, and the quote said, I told him, now he's gone and joined that stupid club, referring to the 27 Club of rockers who died at the age of 27.
Right.
I told him not to go and join that stupid club. Now, that was a quote, very pithy soundbite. She gave that quote to Robert Holguin, and she gave it to another reporter named Doug Barker at the local newspaper, the Daily World, in Aberdeen, Washington. She gave that quote twice to two different people. Now, it's a very pithy, perfect soundbite, and we've always suspected that Courtney fed that soundbite to Wendy and told her to use it. Now, when the police met with Wendy, about 2 weeks later, they met with Wendy and one of Courtney's attorneys to discuss the suicide note. This is after Tom started making some noise. Wendy told the police that it was her belief that Kurt had written the note, and she also told the police that she had filed the missing persons report.
Wow, really?
Right. Yeah, she did. She several times, and to the press. She told the press that she had filed a missing persons report. She had done no such thing. She did not even visit the house when Kurt was supposedly missing. She didn't even go to the house looking for him. But she went along with all those lies that Courtney told. And we don't know why, but she did so. So Wendy O'Connor we list as a person of interest. There's a lot of information about Wendy O'Connor in the book. And we believe that it's sad to say that. I hate, I kind of didn't like writing it, but it had, the facts are the facts.
Relatives kill each other, but Now, there comes we're down to 90 minutes, okay? In fact, even probably we're down to like 25 minutes probably. Now, so I think to proceed, I'd like to hear about what happened when Tom Grant confronts Courtney Love. There comes a day when he confronts Courtney Love, correct?
Right.
So what happened there?
Well, we talk about this in the book. Now, there are a few confrontations. Now, when you're a private investigator, you have to realize you're not a cop. You have to do whatever the client wants you to do. So if a client doesn't want you watching the house, they're paying you. You don't watch the house. You know, she was asking him to do a lot of things that didn't make sense, but she was paying. And if you're the private investigator, a private investigator is not in a position to interrogate the client because the client is free to fire you whenever they like. So,
or you can quit.
But you can quit, right. Well, Tom wrote her a letter, exactly. And on May 8th of that year, Tom wrote her a letter and told her effectively that I believe Kurt Cobain's death is highly suspicious. I'm going to investigate it on my own. You don't have to pay me anymore. Your bill is paid, but I'm going to investigate this on my own. He sends her this letter. He tells the attorney, Rosemary Carroll, about it. She's shocked, but, hardly disapproving. And so he sends her this letter, and what does Courtney do? She calls him, and you can hear this conversation, part of it on the website, and I transcribe it at length in the book. She calls Tom Grant, and she, instead of yelling at him, and this is a woman with a volcanic temper, mind you, she calls Tom, talks to him like he's her best friend, and she hires him to do more work for her. So what happens is this. Tom Grant sends a letter. He says, I believe, your husband has been murdered. Basically, what happens is he said, I'm openly investigating my client for murder. I'm openly investigating. How many times have you heard of a private investigator openly investigating a client for murder while working on that client, for that client on other matters, and doing it openly? I've never heard of that happening before. It's a very strange situation, but that's what was going on. She hired Tom. I think she hired Tom to dig up dirt on her relatives, chase down a lot of silly rumors, and then to surveil her new boyfriend, Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. She started sleeping with Reznor soon after Kurt Cobain died, and she was very afraid that her new boyfriend was cheating on her. So she hired Tom to surveil Reznor's whereabouts, and Tom figured, I can learn more about this case if I'm inside of Courtney's orbit than outside of it. So he just sort of went along with it. But he continued to work for Courtney. But you can hear it, and you can read about this in the book. As the summer turns into fall, Tom starts becoming more and more confrontational with Courtney, and you can see her becoming more and more fearful. She tries to get Tom to sign a confidentiality agreement. He won't do it. These conversations are all transcribed in the book. And then in December, she gives an interview with Rolling Stone. And in the Rolling Stone interview, she refers to another suicide note. She said that Kurt had left her another note, and she quotes this note in this interview. And she tells a couple of other stories in the interview that Tom had never heard before that didn't make any sense. Now, when Tom asked her about this note, he said, where was this other note? Kurt wrote you another suicide note. Where is it? Why didn't you tell me about it? Why didn't you tell the police about it? And she says, oh, well, he left it underneath my pillows in my room, after he came back to the house. But when Tom searched the house, he searched the bedroom. And he said, and you can hear this conversation on the website, and there was no there was no note underneath the pillows, because Tom picked up the bed and he flipped it over, and that's where he found the drugs, the Rohypnol, underneath her mattress. And he flipped the whole bed over, but she never knew that because he actually remade the bed neatly afterwards. So she never knew that Tom inspected the entire bed, and that's where she said this third suicide note was left. And when Tom confronted her over that, that was a breaking point, and that was the point at which that Rolling Stone interview. That was the point at which Tom knew he had to speak out. Now, we depict the book. In the book, we describe this, of course, with Tom's act here as a whistleblowing case, which we believe it is. Conspiracy theory which is what Courtney's detractors call it. I mean, a conspiracy is a very easy criteria to meet. All you need to have is 2 or more people agreeing to commit a crime, then you have conspiracy. So, I mean, calling something a conspiracy theory it means very little. But when we talk about conspiracy theories, we talk about, you and I can talk about the Kennedy assassination or speculate about all we want, but you and I weren't there. So, and those speculations may be valid or not. But that's usually how we think of conspiracy theories. But Tom, of course, was in the center of the storm. He was hired by her. He was in the center of events. And he was taking notes, and he was documenting it and recording it. And so this is an act of whistleblowing. And that's how that's what makes this book a little bit different. We describe Tom's struggles and the steps he took to blow the whistle on Courtney Love. And so it was that Rolling Stone interview that really pushed him over the edge, where he realized that this was definitely a murder. Courtney was definitely involved.
But did he ever confront her? Where he actually sat down with her and said, "Okay, listen, here's what I think happened."
No, she wouldn't do that anymore. Once he got that letter from her, once she got that letter from him rather, where she knew he was going to start investigating this case as a murder, she wouldn't sit down with him face to face again.
Okay, and she offered him more work. And then was that still at 3 times? Is that his normal rate?
Pardon me? I don't recall what the rate was.
Okay,
but it was she offered him more work, and it was mostly just kind of busy work, really.
Right.
I think she was trying to, it sounds like she was trying to buy him off or trying to buy time to figure out what to do about him. Really, I think it was probably her. It was, in a lot of ways, it was very smart of her.
Okay, we got about 20 minutes left. Now, would you like to cover the suspects and why you think they're persons of interest? You think that's a good way to go, or is there something else you want to cover?
No, well, that sounds fine with me.
Okay. The people of interest, who do you got and why?
Well, now, Rosemary Carroll is the attorney, as we discussed her before. Now, when Tom started meeting with Rosemary Carroll, she called him once and asked him to come over his house. And she says, I found something. Now, when Kurt Cobain was missing, or allegedly missing, Courtney staged an arrest at the day before the body was discovered at the Beverly Hills Peninsula Hotel. And she called 911. She said she had an allergic reaction, and she had some fake heroin in the hotel room. And the police arrested her. But the heroin, it wasn't real heroin. They were these Hindu good luck ashes that looked like heroin. But she got herself arrested, which was very convenient for an alibi. Now, when she did that, before she got herself arrested, she left her backpack at her attorney's house. And her attorney, Rosemary Carroll, went with the backpack. I think I sent you by email a copy of this. In the backpack, she found a practice writing sheet, and it was clearly Courtney's attempt to learn how to trace letters to copy. And Rosemary thought, this is Courtney's attempt to, learn how to write like Kurt, to mimic Kurt's handwriting.
Well, hold on. She bought a book on how to learn how to trace?
No, it was just a sheet of paper.
Oh, okay.
Courtney was practicing letter tracing on the sheet.
I thought you said she bought an actual book or a tutorial.
No. It was like,
that would be pretty intense, man.
And then also inside the backpack were the phone records from the Peninsula Hotel. So Tom was able to learn about every phone call Courtney was making while Kurt was allegedly missing. So when Kurt was missing, right around when the murder occurred, after the murder occurred, he knows every single phone call. He was able to turn every single phone call that Courtney Love made. So that was based on those phone records. We were able to come up. That was one thing that informed our person of interest. Now, the first person of interest is a guy named Pat Smear. Pat Smear was someone that he was sort of the fourth guitarist for Nirvana at the end of their sort of reign, but he was a friend of Courtney. Courtney put him in the band and convinced Kurt Cobain to hire this guy. But he's one of her oldest friends, and she was calling him over and over again from the Peninsula Hotel. Very strange guy, and we have 2 chapters on him in Persons of Interest. And Kurt Cobain was, or rather, Pat Smear was the first attempt on which we didn't talk about on Kurt Cobain's life probably took place in Rome, Italy, when Kurt Cobain fell into a coma after ingesting Rohypnol mixed with champagne. And the Rohypnol, of course, was Courtney's, was not Kurt's. And he fell into a coma for 20 hours, and Pat Smear was there and helped and took Kurt Cobain to the hospital. And now Pat Smear also picked up Kurt Cobain from LAX airport and drove him to Exodus Recovery just before he died. Now, after Kurt left rehab and was missing in Seattle, Courtney called him over and over again. Now, what were those conversations about? What was said during those conversations? Well, we don't know. Now, another one is...
Were you ever able to contact Pat Smear and talk to him?
Pardon me?
Did you ever talk to Pat Smear?
Well, Pat Smear won't talk anymore. Pat Smear actually came to Tom. There's a chapter on this in the book, and this had never been revealed before. Pat Smear actually, at Courtney's behest, came to visit Tom at his office in June of 1994, so a few months after Kurt's death. And he came and had a meeting with Tom and tried to figure out what Tom knew about the case or what his leads were and things like that. And Tom immediately, figured that it was Courtney who sent Pat Smear down to learn more about the investigation. It's a very strange chapter in the book. Pat Smear actually left the office, Tom's office in tears. The next person of interest would be Callie DeWitt, and a lot of people know about him. He was the nanny, and he was a heroin addict who worked for Courtney. He was an ex-boyfriend of Courtney's, and he was just kind of one of Courtney's gophers. Courtney had surrounded Kurt with a bunch of her people. And as soon as she got into Kurt's life, it was kind of in an evil way, kind of a smart thing to do. She had driven all of Kurt's friends away and surrounded Kurt with a bunch of her hand-selected friends. It was almost like a noose gradually tightening around him that that he couldn't see. And one of these people was Callie DeWitt, that a lot of people know about. And another one that most people don't know about was Callie's best friend. His name was Renee Navarrete. Now, Renee was a part-time nanny. He was a high school dropout like Callie, and he was a heroin addict. And he supported his habit, like Callie, with Kurt Cobain's money, which Courtney gave him. And that's one of the ways Courtney could control these two. She had the money, she had Kurt's money, and she could supply the heroin. If the money's cut off, their heroin's cut off. So you can see their motivations to do pretty much whatever Courtney tells them to do. Now, Renee has spent a lot of time in the years since Kurt's death overselling the death of Kurt Cobain. For example, and I can read this to you as a quote, he told the British journalist Everett True, he said that Kurt himself had told me a couple of times that if he was going to kill himself, that would be the way he'd do it. Exactly that way. We joke about it. We joke about the process, doing such a big enough issue of dope that we could get the gun to our heads, and that was what happened. So basically, we're supposed to believe that Kurt Cobain came up with his suicide plan and told this junkie gopher for Courtney exactly what his suicide plan was, and they'd sit around and tell jokes about it.
Yeah, and that they joked about it, yeah.
To tell anyone else this story, just this Renee. Yeah,
right.
That's not terribly believable. That was one statement that really raised our eyes in this whole investigation.
Okay.
So that was one person of interest. Another one is Eric Erlandson, who was the guitarist for Courtney Love, and he was sort of her lead gopher. Courtney attracts a lot of men who are kind of weak-willed men who kind of do whatever she says. This is a very common trait for sociopaths. They sort of attract these kind of people that sort of like being ordered around and doing what they're told.
Right.
And Eric Erlandson is one of them. His alibi has changed quite a bit. Now, one of the things, Courtney has done this too, of course. People who if you're doing interrogations, people who are telling the truth, they don't really change their stories over time. Their story is always, it doesn't change much. The story stays the same. Tom Grant's story has stayed the same for 20 years. But people who are deceptive, they kind of change their alibi over time. They sort of add new details all the time, and this is what we see a lot of with these persons. Now, Eric Erlandson, during the time Kurt Cobain was missing, Eric Erlandson actually, he was in the hotel room when Tom was hired in Beverly Hills on Sunday, April 3rd. But that night, or apparently, or the following morning, without telling the private investigator, Tom, he flew to Seattle and went to Kurt and Courtney's house. Now, according to Callie's girlfriend, Jessica Hopper, who was at the house at the time, Eric showed up at the house looking for Kurt and asking Jessica where the shotgun was.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he was running around frantic inside the house, and then he said he was going to, he was looking for Kurt, and where was he? And then...
Would he have money to buy a plane ticket to fly himself there, or would someone have to pay for the ticket for him? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
Courtney could have paid for the ticket, or, Courtney was often took private jets. He could have taken a private jet, with Kurt Cobain's money that Courtney would have,
right,
paid for. But anyway, the following day before, apparently before finding out what happened to Kurt Cobain, he flew back to Los Angeles. So he only flew up either Sunday or Monday morning, went to Kurt and Courtney's house, and then flew back on Tuesday morning back to Los Angeles and went back to Courtney's hotel room in Beverly Hills. Now, he told a different story. There was a journalist named Jillian Garr who interviewed Eric Erlandson by phone. She claims to have done so on Tuesday afternoon. She still has her notes from that interview. But Eric Erlandson told Charles Cross, the biographer of Kurt Cobain that Courtney hired, Erlandson told Charles Cross that he actually flew to Seattle on Tuesday afternoon and came back on Wednesday. So one of the two versions, one of those versions is false, and one of them is true, or maybe both of them are false to some extent. But Eric Erlandson has contradicted himself here. He's either flew up on Sunday or Monday, but he didn't fly up on Tuesday because we know he was interviewed in the hotel room on Tuesday afternoon. But he claims he flew up on Tuesday afternoon. And then Jillian Garr also says that let me change that. Eric Erlandson says he did an interview with Jillian Garr in Seattle after he flew up on Tuesday. But Jillian Garr insists, no, that I contacted him at that hotel room in Beverly Hills on Tuesday afternoon. So that was one inconsistency. Eric Erlandson didn't tell the private investigator who was flying to Tom Grant that he was flying to Seattle to look for Kurt. Left before he knew where he was, didn't coordinate with Tom Grant. Tom Grant found out months later that Eric had made this flight. So it's a very strange thing. It's an alibi that he's never accounted for. Jessica Hopper was the part-time girlfriend who was staying at the house. We believe that Courtney did not know she was going to be at the house. Jessica Hopper is now the editorial director for MTV News.
Oh, really?
She was she's officially one of the last people to see Kurt Cobain alive. So we think that we list her as a person of interest. And also Dylan Carlson. Dylan Carlson, we feel kind of sorry for him, but he was a heroin addict, and he knows a lot about Kurt Cobain's final days, and he hasn't come forward with it. But the one I think the most interesting one that we list is Wendy O'Connor. She's been taking a lot of money from Courtney. She's been going along with the official story. We've talked to people off the record where she will, tell people that she admits that her son, was murdered, but she won't say it officially. And then she's just had a very close relationship with Courtney Love, and she took her money. She still continues to take her money. But then she had a big falling out with Courtney about 10 years ago, and Courtney actually foreclosed on the house in Olympia. And but then they made up, and then Courtney, put her back on the payroll again. She was very chummy with Courtney. She's been seen with Courtney in public. She's attended award ceremonies with Courtney. In the week after Kurt Cobain died, Courtney actually gave her a bunch of pills. She started taking pills afterwards. It was just, she really came under Courtney's control afterwards. And I don't know why she did what she's done. I don't know why she's gone along with the official story, but she has, and she has to be questioned, but it hasn't happened yet.
What is her relationship like with Frances Bean?
Close.
Really?
Frances Bean, we're told, good authority, Frances Bean believes that her father committed suicide. That's what she's been told. She's a little girl. So that would be a hard thing to accept, I imagine.
Okay, real quick, how does Sam Lufty fit into all this? Sam Lufty for a while he was managing Courtney Love, and just recently he's been involved in a kidnapping or something with Frances
He's been
Bean?
involved in a kidnapping, yeah. He kidnapped Frances. I don't know too much about it.
It's the first time hearing about it, yeah.
Yeah, well, I know that, I have it on good authority that the Isaiah Silva is the son-in-law's name, and he was actually gotten the house from Frances Cobain. Frances Cobain bought a house, but he gave it to Isaiah Silva. That probably doesn't sit well with Courtney. Remember, Courtney got a lot of money from Kurt Cobain. When Kurt Cobain died, he left no official will, because he had a new will drawn up, but he never got around to signing it. So the probate court actually established separate trusts, one for Courtney, one for Frances. And there's a lot of this in the book. And Courtney lives so lavishly, private jets and limousines everywhere. She gets a lot of money, but she often spends more goes out than comes in. And she admitted to Tom on a recorded conversation that she was actually paying him with money from Frances's trust fund.
Oh, really?
Dipping into it over the years. And there's a long section of this in the book. Courtney accuses all kinds of people of stealing money from her daughter. But, it sounds like Courtney is the one stealing money from her daughter. She's been borrowing money from her daughter. She officially borrowed about $2 million from her daughter. And then we think unofficially she's been borrowing quite a bit more. We have a long section of this about Courtney and her finances in the book, in the addendum. So that house, she has a $2.5 million house in Hollywood. We think that if I were to speculate, I would say Courtney's not very happy with the fact that her son-in-law is getting that very expensive house and wants him out of there. So that could be one motive behind the kidnapping. But it's a very strange thing. Courtney, she runs with people like Sam Lufty. They're birds of a feather. So I'm not surprised she would have, she's been hiring goons all her life. Her first husband, James Moreland, when Courtney was just a stripper in Los Angeles, said Courtney would strip for a night, take the money that she made in stripping, and then hire a goon to go and beat up some guy who just rocked.
Matthew Rickert, thank you so much. Sudden end of the show. Mysterious Death of Kurt Cobain, Suicide or Murder, You Decide, and also the website CobainCase.com. Matthew Rickert, thank you so much.